Hey everybody, welcome back to History Student Reacts. Today we'll be watching Justinian and Theodora Part 8, Bad Faith by Extra History. Now last time we saw as Belisarius' campaign to retake Italy ran into some serious challenges. One of those challenges was insubordination from his own men, John and Narses, who had been sent directly by Justinian. Now, we don't entirely know if they had been sent by Justinian to undermine Belisarius because Justinian was worried about all the power he was accruing, or if they were simply acting independently, both of Belisarius and Justinian. We'll see if Belisarius continues to face these issues in this episode. Now, before we get into it, I'd appreciate it if you guys would leave a like, subscribe, and check out my Patreon, which is linked down below. Now, with all of that out of the way, let's jump right into this reaction.
Mediolanum had fallen. Its catastrophic destruction reverberated through Italy.
Mediolanum, one of the most important cities, definitely in northern Italy, but probably all of Italy at this time. Mediolanum, Ravenna, Rome, even though Rome had declined from what it once was, and it has just been sacked and the population killed or enslaved by the Ostrogoths.
Then through the entire Roman world. Belisarius penned a letter to his lifelong friend in the East, Justinian. There was an anger to this letter that Justinian had never seen from his friend. The letter laid out just how this tragedy came to be, and just who was at fault. Justinian immediately recalled Narses, and with the order to recall Narses, he sent another letter. There would be no equivocation this time. All of Italy would know Belisarius was in command. And with a semblance of unity restored to the army, one by one the remaining Ostrogothic strongholds fell.
Right. And so in this instance, it looks like Justinian is on Belisarius' side, but I don't know if that entirely clears it up. Now, by the way, there is the question, was Belisarius always loyal to Justinian? And I'm a firm believer that he was. I think his actions evidence that he was loyal to Justinian. He was loyal to the Roman Empire. Now, there are more moments in the future that could make you question, and I think Justinian certainly did, but first and foremost, I think Belisarius was loyal. Now, that moment there, once again, as with everything, there's a lot of ways you could interpret it. If you believe that Narses and John were genuinely acting on their own initiative, this could be Justinian first finding out about it, and he could genuinely be upset and like, no, this is not what I intended. Belisarius is in charge. I think that's a very real possibility. It could be that maybe he did want them to go and undermine Belisarius a little bit, but when he learned about how badly things had gone, he was like, okay, no. Maybe it's even more that, he really did want them to undermine Belisarius, and he really was worried about Belisarius, but he was willing to put that aside for, the practical achievement of the mission he had sent Belisarius on. I think it's difficult to know what's the truth, because we'd have to be able to see inside Justinian's brain, right? How much does he trust Belisarius? How much is he taking practical considerations into account? We don't truly know. I think that obviously he wanted this achieved, and I think he recognized that Belisarius was the right man for the job. And so I genuinely think, however much he trusted Belisarius, we don't know. They'd known each other, been friends for a long time. I think Justinian was worried. I don't know how much he trusted Belisarius, but I think he knew Belisarius was the man for the task, and I reckon when he saw things were going a little sideways, he wanted to reinvest Belisarius with the authority he was supposed to have, right? That is my sort of read of the situation, but once again, you could interpret it in a couple of different ways.
By the spring of 540, Belisarius was at last at the gates of Ravenna. Victory was so close. He laid siege to the city, and when Vitiges' nephew came to lift the siege, he sent John, who, yes, was still in service, to capture the towns to the east, where the families of most of the soldiers of Vitiges' nephew's army lived. As word of this passed through the enemy ranks, the army melted away almost overnight. With no chance of rescue, Vitiges began to negotiate his surrender. But even as he and Belisarius began to talk terms, there was a shift in the wind in the east. Back in Rome, Justinian looked out over his city. A new capital. Not just because Constantine had founded it when Rome began to fail, but because he had reforged it. The Hagia Sophia stood complete. The palace was more magnificent than it had ever been, and soon his new capital would rule over the old homeland.
Yeah, I mean, Constantinople had been the most magnificent city of the empire, even before Justinian. As we've talked about, that honor once belonged to Rome, but the city was not what it once was. A lot of its architecture was crumbling, its population had massively declined. So Constantinople was already this monument to Roman resource and achievement, but especially now, especially after the reign of Justinian, it was truly an impressive and magnificent city that people throughout the entire Middle Ages would visit from, pretty far, and would always be impressed and awed by, especially if they were religious. If they were Christian, something like the Hagia Sophia would really make an impression. But even if they weren't, just the grandeur of the city would be impressive.
He had retaken Africa, and now Italy. Perhaps one day he would reconquer Hispania. A messenger woke him from his reverie. A letter. It took him but a minute to read what it said. Then he ordered, "Pen, paper, quickly. Fetch the senators Domnicus and Maximin." In that instant, those dreams of empire left his mind. Now he was a man trying to balance on a knife's edge. Vitiges had not been idle. While they'd been closing the noose on him, he had written to the Persians in one last desperate gamble. He had told them how much of the Byzantine force was tied down in Italy. And now that eternal peace, that peace that he, Justinian, had paid so dear...
Eternal peace. Right, okay, these two rivals who were always fighting each other. I think the Romans and the Persians might be one of the great rivalries of history for how long they fought back and forth. They had signed an eternal peace, right? With all of Justinian's great accomplishments, this was supposed to be another. I have secured peace eternally in the East. Yeah, right. I'm not buying that. And that eternal peace really did not last long. And by the way, this is the issue with running this big empire. Justinian's already running a big empire with the Eastern Roman Empire. He's trying to return to the unified Roman Empire, which was even more unwieldy. This is the problem. You've got all your soldiers off in the west trying to reconquer Africa and Italy, and who knows what's next? Maybe Hispania, maybe beyond. You've got issues throughout the rest of the empire that those soldiers need to attend to. You get stretched very thin. I mean, this is sort of the story, one of the stories of the decline of the Roman Empire. It was faced with a lot of issues, but the Roman Empire, as it began to decline, was absolutely stretched thin, trying to defend all of its different territories. Justinian is already in that situation, and he's only making that problem worse by taking more and more territory.
Dearly for was coming to an end. Two senators rode up to the command tent of Belisarius's camp. It was strange. They lacked the usual baggage and hangers-on of senators. Their entourage was only a small bodyguard to get them through the ravaged countryside. Belisarius bade them enter, and asked why they'd come. "War has come to the east," they said. "You're needed in Constantinople at once. We bring the Emperor's terms for the Ostrogoths. We've gotten Vitiges to agree. Now your signature is all that remains." Belisarius took the paper they offered him, the peace agreement they had just given to Vitiges, and with each line he read, he became more and more filled with rage and disbelief. Vitiges would remain king of the Ostrogoths. The Ostrogoths would get to keep all land north of the Po. They wouldn't even be seizing all of the Ostrogothic treasury. This was outrageous. He had committed so many years of his life to this fight. He hadn't...
It's not that bad considering all you've done, but from the perspective of a man who has been working so hard, losing men, struggling through this, you can see why he might have the mentality, no, we gotta go till the end. We gotta finish this. I empathize with that. But if you actually look back, so much has been achieved already.
Battled starvation, fought against insubordinate commanders, and sacrificed the lives of countless men just to give up now. Not now. Not when they were days away from achieving everything that they had planned so many years ago. He turns to the senators. "I won't sign it. I don't believe these terms came from Justinian. Without an order directly from him to sign such a piece of ignominy, my pen will never touch that page." He knew full well that even if Justinian actually...
Right, and so this is one of those questionable loyalty moments from Belisarius. Now, like I said, I believe Belisarius was loyal to Justinian, but also, him's I think he probably knew who this was from and just didn't want to believe it, or wanted to finish the campaign, which is, I think, I mean, this could be considered an act of insubordination. I think it's kind of in Justinian's favor. I mean, he's doing the job. But if you're someone who believes that Belisarius did have grander ambitions, maybe you could point to this. But I think this is more evidence that Belisarius was really committed to the campaign, not that he himself had grander ambitions, at least in terms of his own position and his own reputation and all that kind of stuff. But, this is one of those moments.
Actually wished him to sign it. It would take weeks, perhaps months, for such an order to arrive, and by then he would have already crushed Ravenna. But as word of his rejection spread through the camp, one by one his generals came to tell him that they disapproved of his rejection of an imperial decision. And so he called a great council of his generals and asked them if they would have him approve of such a deal. Unanimously they said yes, and he said that exonerated him from any future troubles that may come from not defeating the Ostrogoths. He summoned the senators back and offered to sign, but the damage was already done.
Yeah, so he goes through with it, but, word of this is going to get back, right?
Word of his refusal had not only passed through his camp, but made it to the halls of Ravenna. The Ostrogoths now suspected a trap. If Belisarius, the only Roman they saw as honorable, refused to sign, something must be wrong. And then, slowly, an idea made its way through the ranks of the Ostrogothic nobility. What if they were to go back to the old ways, the ways that came before the reign of the Ostrogothic kings? After all, Vitiges had failed them, and the royal ancestral line of the Ostrogoths was nearly lost. What if, instead, they raised a new man to once again become the emperor of Western Rome? And soon this idea took root, and secretly the Ostrogothic nobility sent out a messenger to Belisarius, the Roman they trusted most.
Yeah, so you can imagine this is really going to be a problem for Justinian. And in fact, when you talk about the relationship between Justinian and Belisarius, and Justinian's potential suspicion of Belisarius, this is what people point to this very moment. Belisarius being offered the crown of the West. This is the big moment, and you can imagine why. If you're Justinian, maybe you're already a little suspicious of Belisarius. You think he has his own ambition, his own goals. First of all, he doesn't agree to sign the peace treaty you've sent him, even though he eventually said, I'll go through with it. Then he gets offered the crown by the Ostrogoths. What's going on here? Does this guy want to be another emperor? So, you can see why you might be a little bit suspicious. And then, in terms of this offer, and we'll see what happens with it, but if you remember, Odoacer, who was an Ostrogothic king, deposed Romulus Augustulus, the last Roman emperor, and then essentially ruled as king of the Ostrogoths and vassal of Rome. Theodoric overthrew him, took over his position, and essentially did the same, ruled as king of the Ostrogoths, and essentially a vassal of Rome, king of this territory, not officially emperor, but that was sort of the deal they had worked out. And so they were kind of like, well, why don't we go back? I mean, you can go back to that, maybe go back even further. What if we crown him emperor? How about that? So it's not like you're too removed from this prior system. In fact, as we saw in previous episodes, it was only recently that sort of open warfare and hostility had broken out between the Ostrogoths and the Romans. So that's how you end up here.
The man they respected on the battlefield and off. They offered him the crown of Western Rome. Even Vitiges, when he discovered this plot.
I think Belisarius was just a great general who conducted himself well. We've talked about how he appealed to the civilians, did this whole Hearts and Minds campaign. But, once again, if you're a suspicious emperor who's worried someone's coming after your crown, you see Belisarius, he's positioning himself for the crown. He's doing not only a military, but a political campaign. He appeals to his enemies, he appeals to the civilians. This guy must have crazy ambition. Once again, I don't think that's true, but it's not difficult to see why someone in Justinian's position may think that.
Urged Belisarius to say yes. And so Belisarius called together all of his commanders and the senators from Rome and posed to them a question. If I could, without assaulting the city or wasting one more life, capture Vitiges, bring all of Italy under imperial dominion, and bring the entire Ostrogothic treasury back to Constantinople, would you support me? And around the room, he got a resounding yes. And so he agreed to the Ostrogothic proposal. And
So not only do you have them offering him the crown, you have him on paper accepting it. Now, as we know, Belisarius does not become the emperor of Western Rome. This is a ploy to end the war, but that's another step up the ladder. He's been offered the crown, and he's even signed for it? How do you know that he didn't accept it and then get cold feet? And all these things, I'm sure, were flying through Justinian's head. Now, I do believe that this was a ploy in order to end this whole thing without more bloodshed. I think that's what he was going for, but, you know,
marched his
all of it's very suspicious.
army into Ravenna. But once inside the walls, he exposed his real intentions: to claim Italy for Justinian, to seize the royal treasury, and to bring Vitiges captive back to the east. He made sure that no further Ostrogoths were harmed, that no looting was done, and that no property other than the royal treasury was seized. But even so, the Ostrogothic nobility was stunned. Here was the noblest of the Romans lying to them, breaking an oath to them, treating them in bad faith. The Ostrogoths raised up a new leader, but even he pled with Belisarius to take the throne of Italy for himself. Once more, Belisarius refused. And so, at last, 5 years after Belisarius had first sailed for Sicily, Italy was conquered. Justinian's dream was complete. But in the end, it had not been captured by force of arms. It hadn't submitted to an honorable peace or even fallen to a noble ruse. Instead, in those last few hours, it had fallen to broken oaths and bad faith.
Yeah, I guess, but, you know, I mean, look, you look at different times throughout history, different societies, they have different honor codes, what is acceptable and not acceptable in warfare, and I understand that, but, you know, and obviously this is my perspective from the year and society that I live in. I look at what Belisarius did, and I say, and I think this was probably his reasoning too, I mean, he said it, if you can end this thing without any more bloodshed, isn't it worth it? Even if you have to pretend to make a promise and then break it, I think it's worth it. Belisarius used a lot of guile and trickery to get around his opponents. We've seen that he was very cunning and intelligent throughout this campaign. If he could end a battle without drawing his sword, he would do so. And I think that's the right way to do things. So I think Belisarius made the right move, but I understand that from a different perspective, this is very bad faith and dishonorable and all that type of business.
And there are always consequences for broken oaths and bad faith. Some are felt soon after, others are buried as seed that sprout only in the darkest winter. And as Belisarius sailed home at last, his
I think that few things are more honorable than saving a bunch of lives, even if it takes you breaking a promise you made.
longtime friend sat in his palace, feeling suspicion and
Right.
the pain of betrayal. The East was in turmoil. The border regions were already at war, and it was all because the man he trusted most in the world had disobeyed him. When his need was nearest, it seemed he could not count on anyone but Theodora.
Right, and of course Justinian had sent these orders to Belisarius because he needed him in the east. And Belisarius says no, then agrees to sign, then is offered the crown, accepts it, but says, oh, it's all a ruse. None of this is looking great to Justinian. He doesn't like a single bit of this.
This friend, this man that was nearer to him than a brother, had allowed one of the mightiest empires in the world to threaten Byzantium, to sate his own ego and ambition. The Ostrogoths had...
I mean, that's how it is from his perspective. Now, I don't believe that's what Belisarius was doing. I truly believe he wanted to bring this campaign to an end. I really don't think it was about personal ego or ambition. But, I mean, we don't know. Maybe it was. I think, to me, I look at Belisarius' career before this and after this, and it seems to me he was loyal to Justinian, and he remained loyal to Justinian. I feel like if he really was trying to sate his ego and his ambition, there are a lot of things he could have done differently, including, you know, taking the crown, setting up his own kingdom or his own empire in Western Rome. Now, maybe you could argue, oh, well, that would never have worked, and he knew that, and so he was just being realistic. I don't know. But I think if he truly was not loyal and he was out for himself, we would have seen a lot more evidence of that than we get.
had been broken. They could have always been conquered a few years down the line. But those months, those precious months that Belisarius had spent on the vanity of a complete...
I think with Justinian and Belisarius, we get the classic politician-general combination. It's very much an Augustus Agrippa type thing, but I think, Augustus tended to at least entrust Agrippa with more responsibility and be like, yeah, you can handle military affairs, I'll do my thing. Whereas, Justinian was definitely more of a micromanager, at least in terms of, Augustus could be a micromanager too, but Justinian was more likely to get involved in Belisarius' affairs and be suspicious of him, whereas I think that Agrippa-Augustus partnership was, a lot more solid, a lot less suspicion.
Conquest, those months might cost them everything. His legions and his best generals, they were all in Italy. Byzantium herself stood exposed and undefended. And then there was the matter of the crown. What was he to...
Even though Agrippa did end up more involved in Roman politics and was not necessarily a threat to Augustus, but politically a threat to his family? Yeah, at times. So Agrippa actually was a little, I think, more politically ambitious, but him and Augustus worked very well together, whereas I think Belisarius honestly wasn't, but Justinian was, more concerned with what he was doing.
Think of the fact that Belisarius had accepted the Western crown. Sure, he had betrayed the Ostrogoths and told them all that he would never take a crown while Justinian lived, but he had accepted Imperium, and that does something to a man. And he had betrayed Justinian to do so. And what of the fact that clearly people thought he was suited to be emperor?
Right.
How do you put such a man at the head of armies? How do you trust such a man without reserve?
And once again, I think there is a fair concern there. I think he was loyal, and I think, Justinian should have been a little more practical with it, but we talked about this before. So many Roman emperors were made by, generals winning battles and their armies declaring them imperator and then them marching on Rome or whatever the capital was and taking the position. Think about, the first emperor was Augustus, but the guy who started it all, Julius Caesar, that was a general who had won popularity through his military accomplishments and then had, risen up as a political leader and really made his name through the military and his achievements. And, forever, before that was already a concern. But especially following Caesar, I think every time you are an emperor or a government watching a popular general, everyone was always thinking back to old Julius Caesar, worrying that the same thing was going to happen again.
And so, with these doubts, and with bad faith built on good intentions, the cracks begin to grow. Join us next time as the two greatest empires in the Western world come to blows, and the cracks begin to ripple outward.
Uh-oh. Hey, we got to see more of that Roman-Persian rivalry that we've been talking so much about. I think we got to talk about Khosrow next time, which will be fun. Anyway, yeah, this was a good episode. I always like the sort of intrigue surrounding Belisarius and Justinian and all these people. And, of course, there's more to go. It's not over. Belisarius has more of his career. There's some more drama left on the table. There always is. And we've got a couple more episodes. Actually, quite a few more episodes. This is a long series. So yeah, I very much enjoyed this one. I think this is a fascinating moment in the reign of Justinian and Byzantine history. If you guys enjoyed this one as well, I'd appreciate it if you leave a like, subscribe, and check out my Patreon. It is linked down below. Now, with all that out the way, I hope you guys are having a good day today, and I'll see you all again next time. Goodbye.